Mark, I want to say a big thank you to you for speaking to our young people this morning. That was brilliant, so thank you so much. We're going to have a reading now, and Mervyn's going to bring that reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and then I have the privilege of explaining it and bringing it into our lives this morning, God's Word, which we love. So, Mervyn.
Today's reading is taken from Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting at verse 1. Pleasures are meaningless. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem, as well the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labour. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Wisdom and folly are meaningless. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes both. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless, for the wise man like the fool will not be long remembered. In days to come both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. Toil is meaningless. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labour under the sun. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labours under the sun? All his days his work is pain and grief. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. A man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too, I say, is from the hand of God. For without him who can eat and find enjoyment, to the man who pleases him God gives wisdom, knowledge and happiness, but to the sinner he gives a task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Thanks be to God.
I want to say a big thank you to Mervyn for reading that chapter to us, Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And maybe as you listened to it being read, you thought, what a depressing chapter. Solomon's writing as if there's no God. That's what the book is all about. Life without God in the picture. Life is a mess. Life is painful. Life is messed up. And folks, we're not to read these verses out of context and assume that St. Paul's Church of Ireland or Arthur Young teaches that life has no meaning and is filled with despair. Yes, I'd want to say outside of God that is true, that life indeed has no meaning, but we as Christian believers are not just called to state some theological truth. We are to come and draw alongside people and engage with them as they struggle with the mess of life in a fallen world, struggle with the cry of their hearts. What is life all about? And folks, I want to say that if you're looking for slick, easy answers, Ecclesiastes doesn't have them. And yet, if you want to struggle with what life is really about, then you'll find that Ecclesiastes really does engage with reality, even in the 21st century. Chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes last week asked the question, where can I find meaning and purpose in my life? Chapter 2 today asks the question, how can I be happy? That's the question at the core of this chapter. Because it seems that Solomon, in his search for happiness, has been down every avenue, tried every option available, and still he isn't satisfied, still isn't happy, still isn't contented inside. The verse that his father David actually wrote, Psalm 37 verse 4, says this, "Seek your happiness in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desire." That's where you seek your happiness. So let's look at this chapter and hear what God is saying to us this morning. The first thing is this: I just want to enjoy myself, be happy, have a good laugh, and enjoy a good time. So Solomon asked the question, is this all there is to life, or is there something more? He has tried to think his way through an answer, using his mind to figure out the mysteries of human existence. But his search for answers to these questions has left him feeling down and depressed. And yet he decides to take another approach. What does he do? He starts talking to himself, and he begins to think about doing something new to get more out of his life. And so he says to himself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself," verse 1. That word test indicates that what follows is an experiment, a deliberate attempt to learn something from personal experience. The word pleasure shows what he wants to experience, and that's the pleasures of life. He's a bit like the song based on Ecclesiastes called "The Wanderer" that you too wrote. I went out there in search of experience, to taste and to touch and to feel as much as a man can before he repents. There's so much of me, myself, and I in these verses. And you get that strong sense of self-indulgence in the pursuit of self-centered pleasure. In other words, he chooses to make his own personal happiness his chief end in life. Not God, but himself. You know, the Catechism says this, that man's chief end, woman's chief end, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And yet that's not the way a lot of people see it. Isn't it true that the way a lot of people live today is for me, for mine, for what I can get out of this that will make me happy? And it's a temptation for us all to live for ourselves rather than God. Did you notice verse 3? It said, life is short. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Life is short. Now, I can't believe I'm 50-something years of age. I think there was a mistake maybe in my birth certificate because I feel like 25, not 55. But you know, that's the problem with life, isn't it? It's so short, a few days. And these few days you have here on earth, you can't do it all. It's too short. You've got to choose what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. You've got to choose what's worthwhile to do and what isn't worthwhile to do. If we were to go out onto the streets and ask people what they wanted most out of their lives, the answer that is given again and again, I just want to be happy. That's all I want out of life. I want to be happy. And Solomon says, that's exactly me. I just want to be happy. And so here's what I tried. Here's the roads I pursued. 1, he tried pleasure. Verse 1, let's have a good time to find out what is good. Let's have some fun. Let's have a good time. 2, laughter he tried. Let's have a few laughs is what he's saying. 3, I've tried to cheer myself up with wine. Let's have a few drinks, embracing folly. That's how a lot of people live, put up with work all week and live for the weekend. And folks, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy, but people are searching for all the right things in all the wrong places. And Solomon can understand that. He has been down that road. He has sought pleasure and fun, laughter and folly. That's the road he's tried. He was a pleasure seeker, and it's only brought him brokenness. So the challenge question at the end of the first question, are you a pleasure seeker, putting up with work but living for the weekend? And where does it get you? What does it accomplish? And does it leave you empty and aching inside? Number 2, I have everything a man could ever want, more than anyone else, and still I'm not really happy, not really contented, and never really satisfied. Verses 4 to 11. You read verses 1 to 11, and you see these words, I, mine, my, occur a staggering 34 times in 11 verses. This is a man who is looking after himself, looking after number 1. This is a man who wants to get whatever he wants for himself, does whatever he likes to please himself. And the list is endless there in verses 4 to 8. Did you notice all of them were plural? Gardens, vineyards, trees, reservoirs. Verse 10, he says, I deprived myself of nothing. In other words, if he saw it and he liked it, he bought it. Simple. And verse 10, I refused my heart no pleasure. In other words, whatever I wanted to do, whatever I wanted to enjoy, I just did it. And yet verse 11 in the Good News Bible says this, then I thought about all that I had done and how hard I had worked doing it, and I realized that it didn't mean a thing. He had more money than he knew what to do with. As we said last week, in today's terms, 2.6 billion per year was Solomon's income. And yet, where did it leave him? It left him only in despair. I read this article of a young man who is a successful publishing manager in England. At 29, he had a well-paid job, was in a relationship, but he describes himself having a midlife crisis, and he was only 29. And in the article, he said, I have a great job, my partner, a good social life, everything I wanted, but gradually this emptiness took over, and it left me feeling blank and demotivated. A leading psychologist pointed out that this sense of midlife crisis that many men in their early 40s or even 50s experiencing is creeping downwards and hitting younger people because we're living harder and we're burning out sooner. The world is dogged by short-termism, short-term in relationships, in work, and this accelerates the process of us feeling dissatisfied and disenchanted with life. So what's the challenge question? We have more than we have ever had before, more than any previous generation, but has that made us any more content or happy? No. What will make us truly happy? Are we living like Solomon did in verses 4 to 11, selfishly, self-centeredly, thinking of me, living for me and mine? Have we lost that sense, even as Christian believers, of self-denial, self-sacrifice, so that we can live wholeheartedly and selflessly for Jesus? You know, you look at all the books in the Christian bookshops these days, you will not find very many books on sacrificial living as a Christian. You'll not find one book that really challenges us as Christians in this society that we live in to live sacrificially for the sake of Jesus, for the gospel, for the sake of the poor, for the sake of the lost, because those sort of books don't sell well. So there's a real challenge for us, for me. Number 3, because I can't find any real contentment and happiness in my life, I find myself becoming frustrated, cynical, and bitter. Do you see the frustration coming through verse 17? So I hated life. I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, pointless, a chasing after the wind, a chasing after your tail. He can't find the key to happiness in his life. Life doesn't make sense to him, and work doesn't bring fulfillment to him. all his life he has worked and he has worried, and for what? Verses 18, 22 and 23 in the Good News Bible says this: nothing I worked for and earned meant a thing to me, because I knew that I would have to leave it to my successor. You work and you worry your way through life, and what do you have to show for it? Everything you do brings nothing but worry and heartache. Even at night, your mind can't rest. It is all useless. You can have so many worries about this or that or the other. Verse 20, this too is meaningless, so my heart began to despair over the toilsome work. Folks, wouldn't Jesus have loved to talk to Solomon, just like he spoke to that rich young ruler? Wouldn't Jesus have loved to have pointed him in a different direction? Wouldn't Jesus love to speak into your heart and my heart this morning? Wouldn't he love to speak to us about the meaning and the purpose and about life? You see, 1,000 years after the book of Ecclesiastes, Jesus Christ said these very words from his own lips in John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus said, I have come in order that you may have life, life in all its fullness. Jesus came to give us fulfillment in the totality of our lives. That sounds like happiness to me, folks. That sounds that Jesus wants to give happiness to us. You know, a guy I met once said, and I'll never forget it, if I was to become a Christian, I might as well throw myself into the sea, because that would be the end of my life. I want to tell you, folks, God is not a spoil sport. He's not trying to take pleasure away from us, but he's wanting to give it to us. Jesus said, no, when you're converted, when you come to me, it is the beginning of real life and real happiness. Folks, we see all around us the emptiness in people's lives. People struggling with failure, regret, despair. And we want to say to them that things can change. Things in their lives can be changed, can be met, can be fulfilled in a relationship with Jesus. Things don't have to stay the way they are. Things can really change. So what's the challenge question for us? So who or what are we working for? That's a good question, isn't it? Is there more to life than this? Is there more to your life than working, getting, acquiring, spending? Folks, there's got to be more to life than this. And there is more to life than this. And finally, number 4, tell me, where can I find the key to true happiness in this life? Verses 24 to 26. What he's saying to us, without God in our lives, there is no key to happiness. Life is not just simply about going from 0 to 75 years of age. It isn't about going from birth to death. There is a spiritual dimension. There is an eternal dimension. There's a God-shaped vacuum deep inside every person that won't be filled by church going. It won't be filled by riches. It won't be filled by getting and acquiring or whatever it is that comforts you and makes your life comfortable, whatever you're stuffing into your life. Because no matter what else you may have, no matter how much you already have, if God is not the center, if Jesus is not the core of our hearts and life, we will never ever be happy and will never ever be satisfied. And really what Solomon is saying to us here in these verses 24 to 26, he's saying, look, I want to spare you the pain. I want to spare you some time because I have accomplished more than you'll ever dream of. I've had more money, more pleasure, more education, more gardens, more properties. I've done it all, had it all, accomplished it all. I've been there and I've done that. But, verse 25, without God, who can find enjoyment? Who can really and truly be happy? Verse 26, happiness is a gift from God. Do you realize that? That happiness is a gift from God. It's something that He offers to you. And you've got to decide whether you want to accept the offer, the gift or not. Because only God can give it to you. And only God will give it to you if, and here's the clause, if you're willing to give Him His rightful place at the center and the core of your life. Not the edge, not to be some sort of add-on, but right at the center and right at the core. You know, folks, the Bible's really clear that you and I must come to the place of loving and total surrender of ourselves. Not just our sins. Yes, you need to break with your sins at the cross. You need to repent of those. You need to break with those. And you need to let Jesus deal with them. But it's not just our sins. You've got to bring yourself to the cross. And you've got to nail self to the cross, because self is the bit that keeps popping up in life, even as a Christian, in my life too. And Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, put self to death, and then you will step into life. Life lived for Jesus and life lived with Jesus. Folks, I want to finish by asking these two questions. Have you ever taken that step that has brought you to the cross and just given your heart and your life and your soul over to Jesus? And the other question, and if you are a Christian believer, then I want to ask you this question. Is Jesus an add-on in your life, a little extra, or is there something more? Have you really taken self to the cross, died to yourself, and now you live for Jesus? Jesus is everything there is to have of me. Jesus is the core of my heart. He is first in my life. Am I willing to set down anything, leave down everything, surrender everything to follow Him? So the challenge question, how happy are you? How happy are you as a Christian believer? Are you truly happy? I remember thinking before I became a Christian, this life isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And that there is one of those things that indeed turned me to Jesus and brought me to Jesus in the first place. Folks, you need to ask yourself a question. When you've been following Jesus even for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, am I really happy in Jesus? Because you'll never be happy until you give Jesus all. Honestly, we'll never be happy until we give Jesus all. Here's Nicola. She's going to share what life during lockdown and faith was indeed like for her. Nicola.
Good morning. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Nicola and I am an officer in the GB. I've been involved in GB since I was 3, so quite a while. For those of you who do know me will know this is something I would not normally do. I'm usually very happy sitting back and enjoying listening to others. But I guess lockdown has changed a lot of things for all of us. None of this is close to normal for us, and we have been experiencing the complete unknown. The one thing that has remained throughout this, though, is how deep God's love truly is for us, and for me, that is proven more throughout this time. As manager in one of the very few day nurseries that remained open, caring for key worker parents and vulnerable children, I've especially found the need to rely on knowing God is around us always. Our job is a huge responsibility under normal circumstances, but these past few months have certainly tested us. We all had our own thoughts, worries, fears, but we had to be there for these parents and for their precious children to try and give them some sort of normality. Those first few weeks, it is safe to say, we went through every emotion. We felt isolated, no support, no guidance, worrying about the families in our care, worrying about the staff team, our own families and friends. These were hard times for sure. Hard times when we needed hope, we needed strength, we needed faith, we needed to feel safe. I remember that first week, I was having a very low moment, and one of our mums came to collect her daughter, and she was chatting with me. She was just so reassuring and calm, telling me that we were true heroes for doing what we were doing, and that she wanted me to know that she was praying for us. But she knew we'd be okay because I had faith. This really humbled me, particularly as both her and her husband are NHS workers and out there in the front line. But the fact she said she just knew we would be okay because I had faith really hit home. I know I'm most likely speaking for a lot of us when I say how much I have appreciated and really found comfort and much needed support from our Sunday services, from Arthur's Bible study, evening services, and the prayer time. They have really helped guide us through the storm. And as we sing, through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all.